Hey everyone, this is Matt Cromwell at WordPress. Recently, I read a great article from Josh Pollock about the rush to have premium WordPress plugins move to a SaaS-based business model. He wasn't really convinced that it was all that significant. Then Chris Lema chimed in on the subject in a Facebook post and wrote his own follow-up to Josh's post. Chris challenged some of Josh's statements. It's a very relevant subject for us here at WordPress in general, and I know for many more in the WordPress community. So I invited Chris to chat with me a bit and dispel some of these myths about the SaaS business model. So this is that interview. Thanks so much.
Sure. I'm a blogger over at chrislema.com. And yeah, I think my take, and I'm on Twitter at Chris Lema. I think my take was that Josh's article was really not, we should go SaaS. Josh's article was more, everybody's telling me to go SaaS, but do I really need to go SaaS? And so he was looking at, and I like Josh, right? I just want to be clear, right? But he was looking at, here are some of the reasons why people say to go SaaS and why there may be other routes and alternatives that you don't necessarily need to. And the reasons he was bringing up were interesting reasons, for sure. And obviously the one that everyone thinks about is recurring revenue, and recurring revenue is awesome. So don't get me wrong, I'm a huge fan of recurring revenue, but in general, my take was that the reasons he was articulating were secondary dynamics, right? That the primary dynamic also was a bigger deal than even recurring revenue, right? And so you think about, well, what's bigger than recurring revenue? Why would anything be bigger than recurring revenue? And the way I explain to friends when we're chatting is, well, imagine that every day you go out, you go to your front porch, you open the door, and there's like a $5 bill on your front porch. Mm-hmm. You're like, this is awesome. Like, I love the $5 bill, but you have no idea how the $5 bill got there. You have no idea if it's your next door neighbor who happens to be 85. And so the moment he's dead, you're done. Like, no more $5, right? And imagine it's not $5. Imagine it's $5,000, right? Or $500. And you're like, wow, we're becoming dependent on a figure of money, but I have no idea how it got here. And what if the money ends, right? What if someone passes away or whatever? But also, what if it's not that? What if it's the $5 bill is floating in, right? There's a breeze. And so, when the wind stops, the money stops. Or what if there's an implicit agreement to the $5 and you don't know what it is, but you're picking it up? And so the fundamental problem, the thing you want more than recurring revenue is you want knowledge and insight, right? You want to know, how did this get here? Why is it here? Who's giving it to me? Is it one person or is it a campaign? Is it every single day is someone else different coming by and giving me money, right? A lot of businesses build their platforms and they manage their costs driven off this notion that, well, money is still coming in, right? And we saw this in the early years with Woo themes, right? Everybody was buying Woo themes and everyone was buying the Woo themes theme club, right? And nobody was thinking through, well, what happens later? Like, what happens when all these people that have bought, even though they bought once, right? What happens when they all show up and have questions? And you're like, well, it's not a problem because we keep making money. And so money's coming in and it's piling up and it's piling up. And then one day, all the questions start coming in and the support starts coming in. And people are like, this support isn't as great as we want it to be. And I would say, well, hey, internet in South Africa is quite slow, so give it some time. They probably already answered you, but it's going to take time to get here. But they were fundamentally frustrated, right? People were like, I'm not getting the answers I want, and I'm not getting it fast enough. And then one day, several years ago, they said, our financial model doesn't make any sense to us anymore, right? It has to change. We have to shift. And thankfully, they shifted to the theme club that was yearly, and then they started taking some themes out of the mix, right? Themes that were rarely used, but when used had high cost of support. And then they took off with WooCommerce, right? And shifted everything else. And even that model has been shifting, right? Now, if you buy an extension, it's an automatic recurring yearly fee. But when the financial model didn't make sense, it was able to be hidden for a really long time because more money kept coming in. And as long as you didn't care, as long as you were totally happy to just be in a place where money was coming in, you could make money and you could live nice and you could hire people, but you had no idea what the actual cost of that money was going to be, what the implicit agreement was, or anything else. So what you want is smart money, right? You don't want dumb money, you want smart money. And smart money means you have insight. You understand how it got here, why it's here, who's using it, what the implicit agreements are with it, etc. And so my response in the article I wrote to Josh was to say, fundamentally, the core thing you want more than recurring revenue, the reason you go for a SaaS is that you want insight. You don't want to build products blindly. You want to build products where you can understand who's logging in and how often they're logging in. And did they log in 5 times within the first month of them signing up? Because that will highlight that they are likely to stick around. Because if they didn't log in 5 times or 3 times in the first week or two, if they don't log in and use it and they just pay you, and then they pay you out of the excitement of the promise, but they never use the software, it means that, in a few short months, they may be, canceling, and you want to mitigate the attrition. And so you want that insight. How often are they logging in? Or you want the insight of how the software is being used, right? Are there parts of the software that are being used in a way that you're like, oh, that's perfect. That's exactly the way we wanted it to be used, right? Or are they using it for something completely different you never thought they would use it for? And you wake up one day and realize that's the model and the business we should be in. But the way a plugin works today, and you download it, install it, and what have you, nobody knows anything. So my issue was, you don't want to build products when you're blind. You want to build it with insight. And so that's the primary reason why you ought to think about a SaaS. Yeah. Now, what's interesting is recently, Josh just wrote another article.
Yep.
And his article says, we want the data, right? So he's writing about .org, and he's writing about plugins, and he's saying, we want all the data. And so at some point, someone says, what data do you want, right? I don't remember if it was Otto or if it was Tony, but someone was writing back and saying, well, what, like, I think it was Otto.
A lot of this conversation he's referencing happened in our advanced WordPress Facebook group. If you're a member there, you should read it. It's a good conversation.
Yeah. So the article itself is not in the group, right? The article itself is Josh wrote it, yeah. but then
this conversation followed.
Yeah. He put it into the advanced Facebook group, advanced WordPress Facebook group, and he's like, we should get more data. And Otto, I think, said something like, well, what data do you want? Like we
don't have it.
we publish what we have. Like, what are you talking about? And he's like, and so he wrote a list of all things he wanted. And I cracked up as I read the list, right? Because what I wanted to do, which I didn't do, I wanted to write back and say, so Josh, basically see my article on SaaS, right? Because all the things you say you want are available in a SaaS, right?
Yeah.
The fundamental challenge though is building a SaaS is not trivial, right? No. And building a plugin can be trivial, right? It can be like
in comparison,
like the early days of why Hello Dolly was there, like over and over. I kept going, why is this here? Why do I deactivate this plugin every single time I spin up WordPress? And then someone told me and said, well, it's there so that other people can learn how to build a plugin. And I go, oh, that's brilliant. Like I didn't know. And it took like, I think I used the software from 2005 to 2009 without understanding why it was there. And then someone mentioned it in 2009. I'm like, oh my God, for years I've seen the thing and I haven't ever thought like, oh, it's there to teach someone how to build their own plugin.
And how simple it is, basically.
Yeah, but you could copy it and then you could start tweaking and changing it. And that's how we learned how to build a theme, right? You're like, okay, take Kubrick, right, and change it. And then you're like, I have a theme. And then all of a sudden someone's like, well, no, you want a child theme. And then you're like, well, how do I do that? Well, let's copy one. And so a lot of WordPress development has been this thing of, I'll just kind of learn as I go and make it easy and whatever. But the reality of the space is there's now a lot of people that write code. There's a lot of people that know more than what they knew when they started. And those people are the people I would encourage to say, look, you're smart, you're capable, you're self-taught, but you really ought to push yourself further, take yourself to a different place where you build a lightweight SaaS with a plugin as a way to communicate back and forth. People are writing against the APIs. Their Google App Engine, right, will spin up all the infrastructure for you and give you tutorials. I mean, if you want to be self-taught, go get self-taught with Google App Engine. And I know when I wrote the article, Otto was like, well, but building a SaaS in one of the comments he wrote, building a SaaS is non-trivial, and you want to make sure that infrastructure is going to stick around for a while.
Yeah.
And that's where I say, great. So don't build it from scratch on a DigitalOcean platform that you're not sure the guy is going to stick around for a while. But if you build it on Google App Engine, you have you have a sense that that engine's going to stick around for a while. Does that make sense?
Yep. I think one other issue though is with SaaS. Well, the combination of SaaS and WordPress, for example, which several good, strong leaders in the industry are going this direction really well. But I think like if you're thinking from a purely .org or WordPress core perspective, SaaS at the end of the day is not open source. It's behind a proprietary wall that's not really shared openly. It doesn't really fully embrace the open source philosophy. So like, just imagine for a second if we could combine the two, or we could have a SaaS that actually also was fully embracing the open source philosophy. That would be something that would work better in WordPress. Not work better, but I mean, not technically, but just from an idealistic perspective, I guess.
So I don't think SaaS means that it is immediately closed source. It is correct that hosted software is not exposed to the user. Yeah. That is correct, right? But that doesn't mean that the software that you write, that you run on a server that is kind of walled off or hidden from an end user who then ends up using a plugin to be the client of that software. It doesn't mean you can't put that software on GitHub. It doesn't mean you can't take pull requests. It doesn't mean you can't make it open source. So those are two fundamentally different dynamics. The licensing of software is the licensing of software. The architectural deployment model is the architectural deployment model. And the two things have nothing to do with each other. So when people convolute the two and suggest that, well, if it's SaaS, it's not open source, is nonsensical.
Yeah, actually, you're right, because you helped me remember that basically that's exactly what WordPress.com is. WordPress.com basically is a SaaS, essentially, and its platform is the self-hosted stuff that we all build off of.
Yep. So those they're not related. You can build an entire SaaS, run it, take the code of that SaaS, and dump it somewhere else. In fact, I think it was Norcross's Yorls plugin, or Yorls code base. I think it's Norcross's, and I think it's Yorls. So I'm hesitant on two different levels, but I think that's what it is. But it was server software. Right. And then what would happen is you would, it's a PHP script or a library or whatever, and you would download it and run it on a server, right? You could run it on your own server. You could run it on someone's server, and then it would let you create short name links. And it's a perfect example where you're going to need a server to run this, but by the way, here it is, and here's all the code, right? Yeah. There are people that have done that forever, and there are people in the WordPress ecosystem who are starting to build SaaSes. Right now, Akismet's been around for a long time as a SaaS. Yeah. And every time someone asks me about SaaS and WordPress, I'm like, it's in your WordPress site. Like, it's there. Just like Hello Dolly's been there the whole time. I'm like, how is it possible that people have seen Hello Dolly this whole time and said, well, it's there so that you can understand a model and how to work it. And then they look at Akismet and they're like, no, I don't know anything. I'm like, it's a perfect example of a SaaS, right? And they're like, well, I don't know if SaaS works with WordPress. I'm like, it's in your site already. Like, it's been working this whole time.
Yeah. I think another challenge is basically providing the justification to the customer of why they need to be paying for this resource every single month. Like, for example, with renewals and premium plugins, you can say basically that if it's an annual renewal, this license gives you access to automatic updates to our plugins and access to our priority support. And then if we are offering basically that same exact functionality but charging for it monthly, well, the customer gets a little bit confused. So that's probably not the ideal way to go about it. So can you just speak into that?
Yeah. So again, we are merging things that don't have to be merged. There are SaaSes that you pay for yearly, not monthly, right? Mm-hmm. There is not that you like, again, we get confused with what's the payment plan, right? Is it monthly or quarterly or yearly? What's the payment plan? And then what's software delivered? SaaS is an architectural model that often comes with a financial model that comes alongside it. Because the architectural model is something that is delivering value consistently, the payment plan can be one that charges consistently, but that consistency can be monthly, it can be weekly, it can be monthly, it can be quarterly, it can be yearly. So there are SaaSes that you pay once a year, and then I think the default for Team Treehouse is yearly, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you buy to get access to educational material, and the promise is you'll get more educational material and have access to more educational material. And I think the default is you pay yearly. It's a hosted solution. You don't pull down the files, though I think you can pull down something. But you just go there and you interact with their hosted model.
Yep.
That model and that payment plan are decoupled, right? Like the fact that you're watching these videos and the rate at which you pay, whether you pay quarterly or yearly or monthly, are unrelated. So I think what tends to happen is when you start mixing these apples and oranges together, you get this situation, well, SaaS means you have to charge every month, and SaaS means it's closed source. And so people go, I don't want that. That's not part of WordPress. And you're like, that's not true, right? In fact, I think the early versions of Akismet was a SaaS that was free, and then it was a SaaS pay what you want, and then it was SaaS pay like $5. I mean, so we've seen the model. The model's been around the ecosystem for a very, very long time. I think the core of it is if you have if you're building a plugin that delivers value once and near in proximity to when you download the plugin, then charging once right up front makes the most sense, right? So if I were to say, well, I can download this plugin and it'll find all my broken links on my whole website, right? And then I'm like, I'm going to charge you $50 a month or $2 a month. It doesn't matter what the price is, right? And you go, okay, so let's say you pay $2 a month. And the first, you install it, you run it, and it finds all the, I mean, like you have 1,200 posts and it finds all the broken links and it fixes them all or lets you fix them all or whatever, and you're done. The next day you're going to write another post, or the next month you're going to write another post. Now it's going to be one post. So in the second month, it runs the broken link checker on one post. Is the value the same? In the second month, is the value the same as in the first month? No way. So in that case, if the benefit is aggregated to the install point, then the value is aggregated to the install point. Therefore, the price should be aggregated to the install point. But let's say we're building something else, which is I analyze all of your traffic and all of your affiliate outbound links, and then go find out whether or not they convert. And I bring you back the data to tell you which of your posts converted better. You're like, that's valuable every month. So if the value's distributed, then the revenue can be distributed in a way because you're delivering value and people are paying for that value. And as long as they keep paying, they keep getting value. And the moment they stop paying, they lose the value. And most people are not, when they're building a plugin, they're not thinking through that value exchange. They're not thinking about where it's aggregated, the dynamic. They're not thinking through how they should then affect how they price or how they pull in that money. And so the net result is everybody just goes to a default model.
So this gets into a little bit more of the hypothetical, because I think some of the pain point that Josh was bringing up, and people like Vova Feldman at Freemius, the kind of thing that these guys are trying to address is they want to get this information. They want to get information from their customers in one way or another. The conversation in Advanced WP Facebook group basically was Josh saying, I want more information about my free plugins on the repo. How can we get this? And they're saying it's not there. Everything that we have is out there in the wild. I'm not sure I totally believe that, actually, but because I'm certain they have a lot more data about how they operate .com, for example, and I'm sure a lot of that would be able to apply to .org as well. But again, this is all hypothetical. But if there was a way for free plugins or even freemium plugins to be able to get a lot more customer data, as is, like thinking of of the space as we know today, and besides plugins that are going SaaS as well, if that information was gathered a lot more effectively or efficiently, would that change things drastically, or does that still mean at the end of the day SaaS is still a much more robust solution?
Well, I think there's several questions or implicit assumptions in there. So one of them is who's collecting the data,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is it .org collecting the data? Now, personally, I believe that the data that they have is the data they've shared. I
Mm-hmm.
don't believe they're also aggregating additional data and hiding it. I do believe they probably have access to more data. Had they wanted, they could have kept, but they didn't keep because they didn't want, which means it just got discarded. And you know, like the easiest point to collect data is as it's coming in. So if you put a listener or a receptacle to listen to what's coming in, and you say, out of this morass of data that just hits me, I'm going to pick these 5 values and save them, then the 10 other values that you didn't want get thrown away. And so I think, yeah, .org could have kept more. They didn't. I don't think they have a storage unit of additional data that they're holding back. I just think they picked what they cared about, and that was that.
Yeah.
And so in that model, if you let someone else collect data, you're letting them decide what is important. And fundamentally, that becomes a problem for you downstream when you want to make a hypothesis against how your users are doing something, and you don't have the back data to validate it, right? Some of the most intelligent systems and engines that learn and do things better apply what's called machine learning, right, and inference engines to run against historical data to see how this would change, right? Like you hear every now and then Google talk about when they make a change to the algorithm for SEO and rankings, and they're like, well, we ran it against this, and we think this gives us a better response. And what are they running against? They're running against historical data, right? They have all the different queries that you've run, and they have all the different responses. They collect data like crazy. So if you're using a third party to collect the data, then you have to be aware that, and you don't have say over what data is collected or what data is stored or how long it's stored, then you're just counting on someone else to have thought about the kinds of things you're going to think about later. I don't normally think that's a great move, but it's better than not collecting data at all, right?
Yeah.
So the first question is, well, who should do it, right? So you're saying, well, if .org collected more of this and shared more of this, would that solve the problem? Like, well, it kind of depends. Do you want .org to do that? And do you believe that .org is thinking through the kind of questions you're going to ask later? And on top of that, every plugin will likely ask different questions in the future, which means .org is suddenly going to become the data management and have to support the cost of that data management. I don't buy it, right? I don't think that's a good model. I don't think it will help. And I think everyone's going to always be upset at .org anyway, right? And they don't need more conspiracy theories. So so I wouldn't do that, right? I think the second thing is, okay, so if someone collects data, if someone were to do that somewhere and gave you access to it, would that solve it? And I go, well, again, likely they would give you access in a way where you could constantly be aware of, who's using it, how they're using it, some set of how often or where it's falling down. So you're looking at data as it's changing and shifting. But are you able to do deeper analysis of utilization? And when you can't do the deeper analysis of utilization, which again would require collecting a ridiculous amount of data, and especially if you're talking about for more than one plugin, I doubt they would do that. So when you finally get to that point where you're like, how are people using this feature? And you find the anomaly, right? You find a feature that you thought would barely be used, and suddenly it's being used dramatically. And you're like, what's going on there, right? You want to dig into that. That data wouldn't be there for you, which means the insight I'm talking about doesn't necessarily arrive in that model, right? I can't tell you the number of times I've built software, and I've built SaaS now for 21 years. So I'm a proponent of building software in this architectural structure.
You do have a bias.
I totally have a bias, right? But the reason I have the bias, right, is because having done it, I can't tell you the number of times a feature has been used dramatically more than we thought it would. And then we discovered it's because it's being used by a different kind of person doing solving a different kind of problem than we ever imagined. And that changed our marketing message, and that changed who we pivoted to serve, and that changed our overall business model. And that's all coming from data in utilization of a feature that you thought would be moderately used, right? I can also tell you that we've spent a lot of money on features that never got used, right? And you're like, what's going on here? This should have been a massive hit, and it's not.
No, yeah, I've talked to several plugin authors who are collecting data who say, well, we have all this data, we just don't exactly know what to do with it. I mean, there are folks who do the opt-in, like iThemes has an opt-in, and Pippin has an opt-in, and Easy Digital Downloads. They collect that data in this way, but then at the end of the day, how do they process it and what do they do with it? That's what.
And that's the third issue is if suddenly someone is collecting a lot of data, and let's assume they collected all the data you could ever want, plus the data that you couldn't imagine you wanted, but eventually later you would want to know that you wanted. If we solved problem number one, and then we solved problem number two, it was deep enough and extensive enough that you could find those insights, whatever. The third problem is with not enough people doing SaaS, the lessons in the WordPress community around how to leverage those insights or how to find those insights is sorely lacking, right? So when you have that as the third, like, I'm not a fan of people writing the post of here's how much money I made, right? I find that there's moderate benefit and a lot of potential downside, especially if you're a plugin developer, if you're a product developer, if you're services, who cares? And the reason I say who cares is because your valuation is likely not going to be massive multiples on your revenue because your services. But in the product space, the valuation of your business depends wildly on how much revenue is coming in, but also what's the trend, and it's a multiple on revenue. And so when you start publishing all that information, you're giving away some of what you ought to keep enclosed, but also you're potentially shooting yourself in the foot if growth year 1 to year 2 was massive and growth from year 2 to year 3 was a lot less. That changes how someone thinks about your business. But my point being, at one point, no one was writing those posts in the WordPress ecosystem. And then a couple people started, and then more people started, right? And it's the notion that when a single model appears and then gets replicated again, eventually people learn from it, right? Yeah. Right now, there's so little SaaS in the space that no one knows how to apply machine learning or how to apply an inference engine or how to apply AI to the data collected to find the issues. There's no one that's written those articles, so there's no one who's doing those things, which means there's no one else who's thinking about how to do it too. None of that learning is happening in our community. It's happening everywhere else.
Yeah.
Right? It's happening outside of the WordPress ecosystem, but it's not happening in the WordPress ecosystem. And so that's the third reason I'd say, I don't know that just someone collecting some extra data and giving it to you is going to solve the problem. Well, there's a bigger issue, which is by not embracing and not looking at and not understanding and working in a SaaS model, you are losing the opportunity to learn what our friends in the SaaS world are learning about how their users use their software and how that changes how they do product development and product marketing.
Yep, absolutely. Chris, I really appreciate your time, man, and this was really valuable stuff. I think there's definitely a lot of room for growth in the WordPress product space in general when it comes to business models in general. I think generally, I mean, even from my own experience, like most of the time, these products are basically developer-driven products. Like a developer built something really cool and they love it and they run with it, and then all the business stuff comes later. And so there's a lot of catch up to do in a lot of ways. But I really appreciate your insights in helping just continue to pound that message so that we can all grow and we can all learn some more. So
awesome.
Appreciate your time.
Thanks.